The cold winds swept through the small Viking settlement as the morning sun barely broke through the thick clouds. This wasn't just any ordinary day in 9th century Norway. Something terrible was about to happen that would change everything. In a tiny wooden house at the edge of the village lived a mother and her daughter. Helga worked day and night as a weaver, her fingers moving quickly across the loom to create beautiful fabrics. Her 8-year-old daughter Astrid would sit beside her, watching with wide eyes as the threads came together to form intricate patterns. They didn't have much, but they had each other, and that was enough. Life under Jarl Bjorn's rule was never easy for anyone in the village. The Jarl was the local leader, but he wasn't the kind of leader people respected. He was the kind they feared. His shadow seemed to fall over every home, every family, every moment of peace. The taxes he demanded were crushing. Families gave up their food, their tools, sometimes even their animals just to meet his demands. Helga had always managed somehow. She worked harder than anyone else, taking on extra orders, sleeping less, pushing herself beyond her limits. But then sickness came knocking at her door. It started with a cough that wouldn't go away, then fever that made her shake under 3 layers of furs. For 2 weeks she couldn't leave her bed, let alone sit at her loom. Astrid did everything she could. The little girl fetched water from the well, made simple soups, and kept the fire burning. She even tried to work the loom herself, though her small hands couldn't manage it properly. She watched her mother grow weaker each day, and the fear in her chest grew heavier. But there was something else she feared even more than her mother's illness. The tax deadline was approaching. When the day came and Helga couldn't deliver what was demanded, word spread quickly through the village. Everyone knew what this meant. Jarl Bjorn didn't forgive debts. He didn't show mercy. He made examples out of people who failed to pay, just to remind everyone else what would happen if they tried the same. The sound of horses and heavy boots came that afternoon. Astrid was stirring a pot of thin soup when she heard them. Her hands froze. Through the small window she saw Jarl Bjorn himself, surrounded by 6 of his largest warriors. They weren't here to talk. They were here to collect one way or another. Helga tried to stand, wrapping a blanket around her thin shoulders. Her legs shook, but she forced herself to walk to the door. Before she could speak, Bjorn pushed it open so hard it slammed against the wall. The Jarl was a massive man with a thick beard and eyes that held no kindness. His fur cloak made him look even larger, like a bear that had learned to walk like a man. "Where is my payment?" His voice was cold and sharp. Helga's voice trembled as she tried to explain. She told him about the illness, about the lost work, about how she would pay double next month if he could just give her time. She begged. She pleaded. She promised anything and everything. Bjorn listened to none of it. He had heard excuses before, or so he claimed. To him, this wasn't about the actual payment. It was about power. It was about making sure everyone knew that he was in control, that his word was law, that defying him in any way had consequences. "You dare show me disrespect?" he roared, and the words echoed through the small house. "You think you can ignore my demands and face no punishment?" Helga dropped to her knees, tears streaming down her face. She grabbed the hem of his cloak. "Please take everything we have. Take the loom, take our furs, take whatever you want. Just please, my daughter is all I have." That's when Bjorn's eyes moved to the corner where Astrid stood frozen, the wooden spoon still in her hand. Something cruel flickered across his face. He had made his decision. If he couldn't take payment in goods, he would take it in fear and suffering. Someone must pay for this insult, he declared, and before anyone could react, 2 of his warriors grabbed Astrid. The little girl screamed as rough hands pulled her away from the pot, away from the warmth of the fire. Helga lunged forward, trying to reach her daughter, but another warrior held her back. The mother's screams mixed with the daughter's cries, creating a sound of pure anguish that no human should ever have to make or hear. "No. Take me, please, she's just a child." Helga's voice was breaking, raw with desperation. Bjorn ignored her completely. He grabbed Astrid by the arm with a grip so tight it left marks on her skin. The little girl looked back at her mother, terror filling her eyes. She didn't understand what was happening or why. She only knew that something very, very bad was coming. The warriors dragged them both outside. By now, other villagers had heard the commotion. People came out of their homes, but they stayed back, pressed against their doorways. They watched with horror on their faces, but not one of them stepped forward. Not one of them spoke up. They had families too. They had children too. And they were all afraid of what Bjorn might do to them if they interfered. Bjorn started walking toward the cliff. Everyone knew which one. The high cliff at the edge of the village that dropped straight down to the rocks and churning sea below. Fishermen avoided sailing near it because the currents were too dangerous and the rocks too sharp. Nothing that fell from that height ever came back. Helga broke free from the warrior holding her and ran after them, stumbling, falling, getting back up. "Please, please." "She's only 8 years old. She's done nothing wrong." But her words meant nothing to Bjorn. If anything, her pleas seemed to encourage him, feeding something dark inside him. This was about sending a message that would echo through every home in the village. This was about making sure no one ever failed to pay him again. They reached the cliff's edge. The wind was stronger here, whipping at their clothes and hair. Below, the waves crashed against the rocks with a violence that matched the cruelty of what was about to happen. Astrid's small body shook with sobs. She couldn't even form words anymore, just sounds of pure fear. Bjorn held her at the very edge. He wanted everyone to see this. He wanted this moment burned into their memories forever. And then, with a laugh that would haunt the nightmares of everyone who heard it, he threw the little girl off the cliff. Astrid's scream cut through the air as she fell, her small body disappearing toward the rocks and water below. Helga's own scream joined it, a mother's cry of absolute devastation. She collapsed at the cliff's edge, her hands clawing at the ground as if she could somehow pull her daughter back up through sheer will. The villagers stood frozen in horror. Some covered their mouths. Others turned away, unable to watch. But not one of them had stopped it. Fear had made them all witnesses to murder, and the shame of that would stay with them forever. Bjorn dusted off his hands as if he had just completed some ordinary task. He looked at the gathered crowd with satisfaction, seeing the fear in their eyes. "Let this be a lesson," he announced. "When I demand payment, I get payment. One way or another." He walked away then, his warriors following behind him. Helga remained at the cliff's edge, staring down at the water where her daughter had vanished. Her mind couldn't accept what had just happened. How could the world still exist when her child was gone? How could the sun still be in the sky? How could anything matter anymore? What none of them knew, what nobody could have seen from the top of that cliff, was that someone else had been watching. A traveler passing through the region had witnessed the entire horrible scene from a different angle. And unlike the terrified villagers, this man wasn't frozen by fear. He was already running toward the cliff's edge, preparing to do something that everyone else thought was impossible. But that part of the story was just beginning, and nobody standing at the top of that cliff could have imagined what would come next. Eric had been walking along the coastal path when he first heard the screaming. He was a wanderer, a warrior who had seen more battles and traveled to more lands than most men ever would in 3 lifetimes. His face was weathered from years of sun and salt spray, and his hands bore the scars of countless fights. But something about those screams made him stop dead in his tracks. They weren't the sounds of an argument or a fight. This was different. This was the sound of pure terror, especially that child's voice. Eric had fought alongside the fiercest warriors and faced down enemies that would make grown men weep. But the sound of a child's scream still had the power to make his blood run cold. He moved quickly but carefully through the rocks and trees, staying low. Years of experience had taught him to assess a situation before rushing in. What he saw when he got closer made rage burn in his chest like never before. A large man in expensive furs, clearly someone of importance, stood at the cliff's edge holding a small girl. Around them stood warriors and villagers, but nobody was helping. Eric was too far away to stop what happened next. He watched in horror as the Jarl threw the child off the cliff. The girl's scream echoed across the landscape, and Eric was already moving before his mind fully processed what he had just witnessed. While everyone else stood frozen at the top of the cliff, Eric ran along a path he had noticed earlier that day. It was a dangerous route down the cliff face, more of a goat trail than anything meant for humans. Rocks crumbled under his feet. His hands scraped against stone as he half climbed, half slid down toward the water. He knew this was insane. He knew the chances of survival were almost nothing. But he also knew he couldn't just stand there and do nothing. The moment his feet hit the narrow rocky beach at the cliff's base, Eric pulled off his heavy cloak and boots. The water here was treacherous. Sharp rocks jutted up everywhere, and the current was known for pulling swimmers under. Fishermen told stories about this place, none of them with happy endings. But Eric didn't hesitate. He dove into the churning water, fighting immediately against the powerful current that tried to smash him against the rocks. The cold hit him like a physical blow, trying to steal the air from his lungs. Salt water stung his eyes as he searched desperately for any sign of the girl. There, a flash of pale fabric in the dark water. Eric swam harder than he ever had in his life, his powerful strokes fighting against the current. His hand reached out and grabbed hold of something, cloth, then small arm. He pulled Astrid's limp body against his chest and started swimming for the shore, one arm holding her, the other fighting to keep them both from being dashed against the rocks. A wave lifted them and Eric used it, letting it carry them closer to a small opening he had spotted between the rocks. His shoulders slammed against stone, sending pain shooting through his body. But he didn't let go of the girl. Another wave came, and this time he was ready, using it to push them through the opening and into the calmer water of a small cove. Eric's feet finally found bottom, and he stumbled forward, carrying Astrid's motionless body up onto the rocky beach. She wasn't breathing. Her lips were already turning blue, and her small body was completely limp. Eric had seen death enough times to know he was looking at it now, but he also knew he wasn't giving up. Not yet, not ever. He turned Astrid onto her side and pressed firmly on her back, trying to force the water from her lungs. Nothing happened. He tried again, harder this time. Still nothing. Eric could hear his own heart pounding in his ears, feel the desperation rising in his throat. Come on, little one. Come on. He kept working, refusing to accept defeat. He had survived impossible battles, crossed frozen seas, endured things that should have killed him 100 times over. He was not going to let this child die. Not like this. Not when he had actually reached her. He pressed again, and this time Astrid's body convulsed. Water poured from her mouth as she coughed weakly. Then again harder. Her eyes fluttered but didn't open. She was alive, but barely. Eric could see she was badly hurt. Her arm bent at an angle that arms shouldn't bend. Her breathing was shallow and painful. Looking around quickly, Eric spotted the entrance to a cave, partially hidden behind some rocks. He had explored this coastline once before, years ago, and remembered that these caves went deep into the cliff. More importantly, they were nearly impossible to find unless you knew exactly where to look. He gathered Astrid's small, broken body carefully in his arms and made his way to the cave. Inside it was dark and cold, but it was also dry and hidden. Eric laid the girl down on his cloak, which he had somehow managed to grab before diving in. Her breathing was still weak, each breath a struggle. Eric worked quickly, using skills he had learned from healers in different lands. He had always paid attention when others shared their knowledge, never knowing when such things might save a life. Now that attention was the only thing standing between this child and death. He carefully examined her injuries. Her left arm was definitely broken, possibly in more than one place. He could tell by the way she flinched even while unconscious that she had broken ribs. There were cuts and bruises everywhere, and the cold water had done its own damage. From his travel pack, which he had left near the cliff path and now retrieved, Eric pulled out various items. A small knife, some rope, pieces of cloth. He needed to set that arm before the bones healed wrong. This was going to hurt her, even unconscious as she was, but there was no choice. Working as gently as possible, Eric straightened Astrid's broken arm. She whimpered in her unconscious state, but he couldn't stop. He found 2 pieces of driftwood that would work as splints and carefully bound them around her arm with strips of cloth. It wasn't perfect, but it would have to do for now. Next, he needed to warm her up. The cold was almost as dangerous as her injuries right now. Eric started a small fire near the cave entrance, positioning it so the smoke would drift out but the heat would stay in. He had learned this trick from northern tribes who lived in snow caves during winter. As the fire grew, he wrapped Astrid in every piece of dry clothing and fur he had. He made her a bed of soft moss and seaweed, anything to keep her off the cold stone. Then he sat beside her through the night, keeping the fire going, watching her breathe, and praying to any god who might be listening that she would survive until morning. Throughout that long, dark night, Astrid's breathing remained shallow but steady. Sometimes she would cry out in her unconscious state, reliving the terror of falling. Eric would speak softly to her then, his rough voice gentle in a way it rarely was. He told her she was safe now, that nobody would hurt her anymore, that he wouldn't let anything happen to her. He thought about the scene he had witnessed at the cliff top. The cruel Jarl who threw away a child's life like it meant nothing. The warriors who followed such orders. The villagers who watched and did nothing, though he understood their fear. In a way, he couldn't blame them. What could ordinary people do against an armed Jarl and his warriors? But Eric wasn't ordinary people. He had been a warrior for most of his life. had traveled from one end of the known world to the other. He had seen tyranny before, had fought against it more than once. He knew what needed to be done about men like that Jarl, but first he had to make sure this little girl survived. As dawn began to break, sending weak light into the cave entrance, Astrid's eyes finally fluttered open. They were unfocused at first, confused. Then the memories hit her and fear flooded her face. She tried to sit up, crying out in pain as her broken ribs protested. "Easy, easy," Eric said softly, gently pressing her back down. "You're safe." "You're hurt, but you're safe." Astrid stared at him with wide, terrified eyes. She didn't know this man. The last person she had seen was the Jarl throwing her off the cliff. Her small body trembled, and Eric could see she wanted to run but couldn't. "My name is Eric," he told her calmly. "I saw what that man did to you. I pulled you from the water. I know you're scared, but I promise you I'm not going to hurt you. Nobody is going to hurt you ever again." Tears started streaming down Astrid's face. "My mother," she whispered, her voice hoarse from the salt water and screaming. "I want my mother." Eric's heart broke at those words. He didn't know how to tell this child that she couldn't go back home, that everyone thought she was dead, that if anyone discovered she had survived, the Jarl would just kill her again. So instead, he made her a promise. "We'll get you back to your mother," he said. "I swear it. But first you need to heal. Can you be brave a little longer?" Astrid nodded weakly, though Eric could see the confusion and fear still in her eyes. She was just a child who had been through something no person, let alone a child, should ever experience. But she was alive. Against all odds, impossibly, she was alive. And Eric was going to make sure she stayed that way. The first week was the hardest. Astrid's body fought to heal itself while fighting off fever and infection. Eric barely slept during those days, constantly checking on her, changing bandages made from torn cloth, keeping her warm and trying to get some food and water into her small body. He had found a better cave system deeper in the cliffs, one with multiple chambers that stayed warmer and drier. It took careful planning to move Astrid there without being seen, but Eric managed it during a storm when nobody would be near the coastline. The new hiding place had a small freshwater spring trickling down one wall, which was perfect for cleaning wounds and having drinking water. Astrid drifted in and out of consciousness those first days. When she was awake, she would cry for her mother. The sound of it tore at Eric's heart, but he stayed strong for her. He would tell her stories to distract her from the pain, tales of his travels to distant lands, of great sea voyages and strange creatures he had seen. Sometimes she would listen, her eyes growing wide despite her suffering. Other times she would just stare at the cave ceiling, lost in her own thoughts and trauma. Eric hunted and gathered food carefully, always making sure nobody saw him. He caught fish from hidden parts of the coast, gathered mussels from rocks, found bird eggs, and picked berries from bushes inland. He made simple but nourishing meals, and slowly, very slowly, Astrid began to eat more. By the second week, her fever broke. The change was remarkable. Astrid woke up one morning and for the first time her eyes looked clear and focused. She was still in terrible pain, especially from her broken ribs, but the worst danger had passed. Eric felt relief wash over him like a wave. She was going to survive. "What happened to me?" Astrid asked one day, her voice still weak. "After I fell." "How am I alive?" Eric settled down beside her, feeding small sticks into their fire. "I happened to be passing by when that man threw you off the cliff. I went into the water after you." Astrid's eyes widened. "Nobody goes in those waters. Everyone says you'll die." "Well, I suppose I'm either very brave or very stupid," Eric said with a small smile. "Maybe both." For the first time since the terrible day, Astrid's lips curved into the tiniest hint of a smile. It disappeared quickly, but Eric had seen it. That was good. That meant the spirit inside her wasn't completely broken. As the third week began, Astrid was able to sit up on her own, though it still hurt. Her arm was healing in its splint, and the bruises covering her body were starting to fade from purple to yellow. Eric showed her how to do simple breathing exercises that would help her ribs heal without causing too much pain. It was during this time that they really began to talk. Astrid told Eric about her life in the village, about her mother's weaving, about how hard things had been but how they had always managed together. She told him about the day Jarl Bjorn came, and as she spoke, Eric could see the fear and confusion on her face. "Why did he do it?" she asked, her voice small. "We were going to pay. My mother promised we would pay." Why did he throw me off the cliff? Eric was quiet for a moment, thinking about how to explain cruelty to a child. Some people, he said finally, use fear to control others. That Jarl, he wanted everyone in your village to be so afraid of him that they would never question anything he demanded. He hurt you to make everyone else scared. But I was just a little girl, Astrid whispered. I didn't do anything wrong. No, you didn't. And that's exactly why what he did was so evil. You were innocent and he didn't care. Tears rolled down Astrid's cheeks. Is my mother okay? She must think I'm dead. She must be so sad. This was the conversation Eric had been dreading. Your mother does think you're dead, he admitted gently. Everyone does. And I know that's hard to hear, but right now that's actually keeping you safe. Astrid looked confused, so Eric explained. If the Jarl found out you survived, he would kill you for real this time. And he would probably hurt your mother too, for good measure. Right now everyone thinks you died when you hit the water. That means the Jarl isn't looking for you. That means you're safe here while you heal. But my mother is all alone and thinks I'm gone, Astrid said, her voice breaking. I want to see her. I want to go home. I know you do. And you will, I promise. But not yet. First, you need to get completely better. And second, we need to make sure that when you do go back, that Jarl can never hurt you or your mother or anyone else ever again. Something changed in Astrid's expression. The sadness was still there, but something else appeared alongside it. Something harder. How do we do that? Eric studied the young girl in front of him. Most children her age would be completely broken by what she had been through. But he saw something different in Astrid. A core of steel that suffering had revealed rather than destroyed. First you heal, then you learn. And when the time is right, we make sure everyone knows what he did. We make sure he faces justice. Justice? Astrid's voice was bitter beyond her years. Who would give us justice? He's the Jarl. He makes the rules. There are laws older and more powerful than any Jarl, Eric told her. There is the thing, the great assembly where even Jarls can be judged. But to bring a case there, we need proof. We need witnesses. We need to be smart and careful. Over the following days, as Astrid continued to heal, Eric began teaching her things. Not fighting, not yet, she was too young and too injured for that. But he taught her about survival, how to find food in the wilderness, which plants could heal and which could harm, how to read the weather by looking at the sky and feeling the wind, how to move quietly and observe without being seen. Astrid absorbed everything like dry ground soaking up rain. She had always been bright, her mother had told her that, but now her intelligence had a new purpose. Every skill Eric taught her was one more tool she could use to survive, to protect herself, to never be helpless again. One evening, as they sat by the fire eating roasted fish, Astrid asked, "Why are you helping me?" "You don't know me. You could have just kept traveling and forgotten what you saw." Eric stared into the flames for a long moment. "I had a daughter once," he said quietly. "Long ago, in another life. She would be about your age now if she had lived." Astrid's eyes widened. "What happened to her?" "Sickness took her and her mother during a hard winter when I was away at sea. I came home to find them both gone." Eric's voice was rough with old pain. "I couldn't save them, but I could save you. Maybe that's reason enough." Without thinking, Astrid reached out with her good hand and took Eric's calloused one. They sat there in silence, two wounded souls finding comfort in each other's presence. As the weeks passed, Astrid grew stronger. Her arm was healing well, and she could take deep breaths without her ribs screaming in protest. She could walk around the cave system, even climb a bit. The physical wounds were fading, but Eric knew the wounds inside would take much longer to heal if they ever truly did. Meanwhile, back in the village, life went on under Jarl Bjorn's shadow. Helga had barely left her house since losing Astrid. The other villagers brought her food and tried to offer comfort. But how do you comfort a mother who watched her child murdered? The weaver's loom sat silent, gathering dust. Helga moved through her days like a ghost, barely eating, barely sleeping, consumed by grief and guilt. She blamed herself. If only she hadn't gotten sick. If only she had paid the tax on time. If only she had fought harder to protect her daughter. The if-only thoughts circled endlessly in her mind, giving her no peace. Jarl Bjorn, for his part, seemed to have completely forgotten the incident. He had made his point, enforced his authority, and moved on to other matters. In his mind, the matter was settled. In his arrogance, he never imagined that what he had done would ever come back to haunt him. But far away in a hidden cave, A little girl was learning to survive. And a warrior was planning. The wheels of justice turned slowly sometimes, but Eric was patient. He had learned patience over his long years. He could wait until the time was right. One night, nearly 3 weeks after the incident, Astrid woke from a nightmare. She had dreamed of falling, of the water closing over her head, of her mother's screams. She sat up, breathing hard, and found Eric already awake, keeping watch as he often did. "I had the dream again," she said. "I know. You called out. Does it ever stop?" "The dreams?" Eric was quiet for a moment. "I don't know," he admitted. "I still have dreams about things that happened years ago. But they become less frequent. And you learn to be stronger than the dreams." Astrid pulled her knees to her chest, careful of her healing ribs. "Eric, I want to learn to fight. When my arm is healed, will you teach me? You're very young to start warrior training." "I'm old enough to almost die," Astrid said flatly. "I'm old enough to learn how to protect myself." Eric smiled despite himself. This girl had more courage in her small body than many warriors he had known. "When you're healed, we'll see. First, there's someone I want you to meet. An old friend who lives a few days' journey from here. She's a shield maiden, one of the finest warriors I've ever known. If anyone can train you properly, it's her." "A woman warrior?" Astrid's eyes lit up with interest. "One of the best. Her name is Ragna. She's tough as iron, but fair. I think you'll like her." For the first time in weeks, Astrid felt something other than pain and fear and sadness. She felt hope. Maybe she could become strong. The journey to Ragna's settlement took 5 days, and Eric made sure they traveled only at night or through hidden paths. Astrid's arm was still in its splint, but she could walk well enough now. The journey was hard for someone so young and still recovering, but the girl never complained. She had learned that complaining changed nothing. They arrived at Ragna's longhouse just as the sun was setting. The shield maiden's home stood on the edge of a forest, away from larger settlements but close enough to trade routes that travelers often passed through. When Ragna opened her door and saw Eric standing there with a young girl, her weathered face broke into a rare smile. "Eric the Wanderer, I haven't seen you in 3 summers. And who is this?" "This is Astrid. She needs a safe place to stay while I travel. And she needs training." Ragna's sharp eyes took in the splinted arm, the fading bruises, the haunted look in the young girl's eyes. She had seen enough of war and violence to recognize a survivor when she saw one. "Come inside, both of you. You look like you have quite a story to tell." Over warm food and ale, Eric told Ragna everything. The shield maiden's expression grew darker as the tale unfolded. When Eric described how Bjorn had thrown Astrid off the cliff, Ragna's hand tightened around her cup so hard her knuckles turned white. "A child," she said quietly, and there was cold fury in her voice. "He threw a child off a cliff for missing a tax payment." "It gets worse," Eric continued. "While I've been helping Astrid heal, I've been listening to travelers who pass through the region. Bjorn's cruelty isn't new. It's just that everyone is too afraid to speak against him, but people talk when they think nobody important is listening, and I've been listening." Over the next few days, Eric prepared to leave on a longer journey. Before he left, he sat down with Astrid and explained what he planned to do. "I'm going to travel through the lands that Jarl Bjorn controls, and the areas around them. I need to find others who have suffered because of him. I need to gather proof of his crimes, and I need to find warriors who are brave enough and angry enough to stand against him." Astrid's eyes were serious beyond her years. "How long will you be gone?" "Months, maybe longer. But you'll be safe here with Ragna. She'll teach you things I can't, and when I come back, we'll make our move." "Promise you'll come back?" Eric knelt down to look Astrid in the eyes. "I promise. We started this together and we'll finish it together." After Eric left, Ragna began Astrid's training. At first, it was simple things: building strength, learning balance, developing patience. Ragna had Astrid doing exercises every day, carefully working around her healing injuries. The shield maiden was tough but never cruel, pushing Astrid to her limits but never beyond them. "A warrior's strength comes from discipline," Ragna would say. "Anyone can swing a sword in anger. A true warrior stays calm when everyone else panics." As the months passed, Astrid's body healed and grew stronger. Her broken arm mended straight and true. Her ribs stopped aching. The bruises faded completely. But more than that, her mind grew sharper. Ragna taught her to think like a strategist, to see several moves ahead, to understand that the smartest fighters often won without ever drawing their weapons. Meanwhile, Eric traveled throughout the region like a shadow, gathering information everywhere he went. In a coastal village, he found a fisherman whose son had disappeared after questioning one of Bjorn's tax collections. The body had washed up 3 days later with clear signs of violence. In a farming community, he met an elderly couple whose land had been seized by Bjorn's men when they couldn't pay an impossible tribute. They had been forced to watch their home burn before being driven away with nothing. In a merchant town, he discovered that Bjorn had ordered the execution of a rival Jarl under false accusations of theft. The rival's family had been scattered, their wealth taken, their name dishonored. The pattern was clear and horrifying. Bjorn's cruelty toward Astrid wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a long history of violence, theft, and murder. And every person Eric talked to had the same reaction. They were angry, they wanted justice, but they were also terrified. Bjorn had warriors, wealth, and power. What could ordinary people do against that? But Eric also found others who weren't ordinary people. In his travels, he encountered warriors who had served under Bjorn and left in disgust. Men and women who had been ordered to do things that violated their own codes of honor. Some had refused and been cast out. Others had obeyed and been haunted by their actions ever since. There was Gunnar, a massive warrior who had been one of Bjorn's most trusted men, until he was ordered to burn down a home with a family still inside. Gunnar had refused, fought his way out of Bjorn's service, and lived as an outcast ever since. The shame and anger in his eyes when he talked about his former Jarl was palpable. There was Freya, a skilled archer whose brother had been executed by Bjorn for the crime of winning a contest that made the Jarl look bad. She had been planning her revenge for years, but knew she couldn't take on Bjorn's forces alone. There was old Thorvald, who had once been a law speaker before Bjorn had him removed from the position for ruling against him in a dispute. The old man still had connections throughout the region and knew the law better than anyone. Eric brought them together slowly, carefully. He never mentioned Astrid at first, just talked about Bjorn's crimes in general. He let people share their own stories, let the anger and desire for justice build naturally. He was patient, knowing that rushing would ruin everything. One night, gathered around a fire in a secluded spot, Eric addressed the group that had formed. There were about 20 people there, warriors mostly, but also a few farmers who knew how to fight and merchants who had lost everything to Bjorn's greed. "We all know what Jarl Bjorn is," Eric said. "We've all suffered because of him or watched others suffer. But knowing isn't enough. If we want real justice, we need to do this right. We need to bring him before the Thing and let the Assembly judge him according to the law. The Thing won't rule against a Jarl on our word alone," Thorvald said. "We need irrefutable proof. We need witnesses who will speak publicly. And we need something that will shock the entire Assembly into action." "I have something," Eric said quietly. "A survivor. Someone Bjorn tried to murder but who lived to tell the tale. A witness who can stand before the Assembly and testify to his cruelty." He told them Astrid's story then. The room fell silent as he spoke. When he finished, Gunnar spoke first, his voice thick with emotion. "A child. He threw a child off a cliff. The big warrior's hands were shaking. I served that monster. I followed his orders. Gods forgive me. We've all done things we regret," Eric said, "or failed to do things we should have. But now we have a chance to make it right. The next Thing Assembly is 6 months away. That gives us time to gather more evidence, recruit more people, and prepare our case. Are you with me?" One by one, hands went up. Weapons were raised. Oaths were sworn. A band of unlikely allies formed that night, united by their hatred of tyranny and their hunger for justice. Back at Ragna's longhouse, Astrid continued her training, unaware of the army Eric was building. She had grown taller over the months, stronger too. Ragna had started teaching her actual combat now, staff fighting at first, then knife work. The Shield Maiden was impressed by how quickly Astrid learned. "You have a gift for this," Ragna told her one day after a particularly good training session. "Natural balance, good instincts. With a few more years of training, you could be formidable." "I don't want to be formidable," Astrid said quietly. "I just want to be strong enough that nobody can ever hurt me like that again." Ragna studied the girl thoughtfully. "Strength isn't just about fighting. It's about courage. And you, little one, have more courage than warriors twice your size. You survived something that should have killed you. You're here training instead of giving up. That's real strength." Those words meant more to Astrid than Ragna could know. The nightmares still came sometimes. Dreams of falling, of drowning, of her mother's screams, but they were less frequent now. And when she woke from them, she would practice the breathing exercises Eric had taught her. Remember Ragna's words about courage and slowly calm herself down. One evening, as winter began to creep in, Eric returned. He had been gone for nearly 4 months and he looked tired but determined. Astrid ran to him and he swept her up in a hug, careful of her once broken arm. "Look at you," he said, holding her at arm's length. "You've grown. Ragna's been training me. I can fight with a staff now. Want to see?" Eric laughed, a rare sound from him. "Maybe tomorrow. Tonight I need to talk with both of you about what happens next." Inside, over a warm meal, Eric laid out his plan. He had gathered evidence from across the region. He had recruited a force of warriors and supporters. Most importantly, he had secured the backing of 3 other Jarls who had their own grievances against Bjorn, but had been waiting for the right moment to act. "The thing meets in the spring," Eric explained. "That's when we make our move. We bring every piece of evidence, every witness, and most importantly, we bring you, Astrid. You'll stand before the assembly and tell them exactly what Bjorn did." Astrid's eyes widened. "Me? Stand in front of everyone? You're the key to everything. You're proof that Bjorn is not just corrupt or greedy, but truly evil." Spring arrived with melting snow and longer days. Nearly a year had passed since that terrible day at the cliff. Astrid was now 9 years old, and the change in her was remarkable. She stood taller, moved with confidence, and spoke with a strength that hadn't been there before. The frightened little girl was still inside her somewhere, but she had been forged into something stronger by everything she had endured. Eric gathered his allies for a final planning session before the thing. They met in an abandoned farm building. Far from any settlements where spies might overhear, around 30 people were present now, warriors and victims, all united in their cause. "The thing assembly happens in 6 weeks," Eric began, standing before the group. "Jarl Bjorn will be there, along with every other Jarl, chieftain, and law speaker in the region. It's the perfect opportunity, but we need to be smart about this." Thorvald, the elderly law speaker, stood up. "I've been reviewing the laws. To bring a case against a Jarl, we need formal accusations presented properly. We need multiple witnesses willing to speak under oath. And most crucially, we need the support of other Jarls or the assembly won't even hear the case." "I've secured that," Eric said. 3 Jarls have agreed to support bringing charges. They've had their own troubles with Bjorn, land disputes mostly, but they've been too cautious to act alone. Our case will give them the cover they need. Freya, the archer, spoke up. "But will they actually stand with us when the moment comes? Or will they back down once Bjorn starts throwing his weight around?" "That's where Astrid comes in," Eric said. "When that little girl walks into the assembly and tells her story, when everyone sees the child that Bjorn tried to murder standing alive before them, it will be impossible for anyone to back down. Her very existence is proof of his crime." All eyes turned to Astrid, who sat quietly beside Ragna. The shield maiden had her hand on the girl's shoulder, a gesture of both support and protection. "Are you ready for this?" Gunnar asked gently. The big warrior had grown especially protective of Astrid over the winter months, perhaps trying to make up for the years he had spent serving the man who tried to kill her. Astrid stood up, and though she was still small compared to the warriors around her, there was nothing small about her presence. "I've been ready since the day Eric pulled me from the water. Jarl Bjorn thinks he killed me. He thinks he got away with it. I want to see his face when he realizes he didn't." A murmur of approval went through the group. This child had more spine than many grown warriors, but Eric knew that simply showing up at the thing wasn't enough. Bjorn had power, wealth, and his own warriors. He could try to dismiss the charges, intimidate witnesses, or even resort to violence if he felt cornered. They needed to weaken his position before the assembly even began. "We have 6 weeks," Eric said. "In that time, we need to accomplish several things. First, we continue gathering witnesses. Every person who has suffered under Bjorn's rule needs to know that it's finally safe to speak up. Second, we need to undermine his support. Some of Bjorn's allies follow him out of fear, not loyalty. We need to show them that the tide is turning." Over the next few weeks, Eric's network spread out across the region like water seeping into cracks. They didn't attack anyone or destroy anything. Instead, they talked to people. They shared stories. They let others know that they weren't alone in their suffering, that justice might finally be possible. One of their most effective tactics was freeing Bjorn's thralls, the enslaved people who worked his lands. Eric's people would approach thralls working in the fields at night, tell them about safe places they could run to and help them escape. Every thrall who disappeared was a loss of labor and a blow to Bjorn's pride. They also began intercepting some of Bjorn's trade shipments. Nothing too obvious, just enough to cause problems. A shipment of iron ore that mysteriously ended up at the wrong port. A trade agreement that fell through because the other party suddenly received a better offer. Small frustrations that began to pile up. Bjorn noticed, of course. He grew increasingly angry and paranoid, suspecting rivals and enemies everywhere. But he couldn't pin the problems on any specific person or group. It was like fighting shadows. And that paranoia made him act even more erratically, which only pushed more people away from him. Meanwhile, Thorvald worked on the legal aspects. He met quietly with other law speakers, reminding them of their duty to uphold justice regardless of who stood accused. He researched precedents, cases where Jarls had been held accountable for their actions. He built an ironclad legal framework that would be hard for anyone to dismiss. One of the Jarls who had agreed to support their case, a man named Håkon, sent word that he wanted to meet with Astrid personally. Eric was initially suspicious. Why would a Jarl want to meet with her before the assembly? But Håkon's message emphasized that he wanted to understand exactly what had happened, that he needed to look the child in the eyes and hear her story directly. Eric, Ragna, and Astrid traveled to Håkon's hall. The Jarl was an older man, his beard more gray than black, with eyes that had seen many winters. When Astrid was brought before him, he studied her carefully. "Tell me what happened," he said simply, not a rehearsed speech. Just the truth. Astrid told her story. She described her mother's illness, the taxes they couldn't pay, Jarl Bjorn's arrival. Her voice shook slightly when she got to the part about being thrown from the cliff, but she pushed through it. She told him about the fall, the water, waking up in the cave with Eric watching over her. When she finished, Håkon was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I have grandchildren your age. The thought of someone doing that to any child makes my blood boil. You have my full support, little one. I will stand with you at the thing, and I will make sure others do the same." That meeting changed something. When word spread that Jarl Håkon himself had met with the surviving child and declared his support for the case, others began to take notice. Support for Bjorn began to crack. Even some of his own warriors started questioning their loyalty. One of those warriors was a man named Sten, who had been present the day Bjorn threw Astrid off the cliff. The memory had haunted him for a year. He had stood there and done nothing, and that cowardice ate at him every day. When he heard that the girl had somehow survived, he felt something break loose inside him. Sten approached Eric secretly one night. "I was there," he said, his voice thick with shame. "I saw what he did. I should have stopped it, but I was a coward. Let me testify. Let me tell everyone that Bjorn did exactly what that child says he did." Eric studied the warrior carefully. "Bjorn will see this as betrayal. You'll lose everything." "I've already lost everything that matters," Sten said. "My honor, my self-respect. Let me at least try to get those back." With each passing day, their case grew stronger. More witnesses came forward. More of Bjorn's supporters quietly withdrew their backing. The network of allies expanded. And through it all, Astrid prepared for the moment she would face her would-be killer. Ragna helped her practice speaking clearly and standing tall. Eric coached her on how to stay calm even if Bjorn tried to intimidate her. They role-played different scenarios, preparing her for questions she might be asked. "What if he says I'm lying?" Astrid asked one day. "Then we produce the witnesses who saw it happen," Eric replied. "Then we show your healed injuries. Then we ask him to explain how a child could survive a fall like that without help. And why would anyone help fake such a thing? The truth is on our side, Astrid. We just need to present it clearly." As the date of the thing approached, Eric sent word to Helga, Astrid's mother. The message was carefully worded, delivered by a trusted person. It simply said that her daughter lived, that she was safe, and that she would see her again soon. Eric didn't want to risk bringing them together before the thing in case word somehow reached Bjorn, but he couldn't let the mother's grief continue any longer. When Helga received the message, she collapsed to her knees and wept. For months she had been barely alive, going through the motions of living while dying inside. Now impossibly miraculously her daughter was alive. The relief and joy were so intense they were almost painful. The night before they were to leave for the thing, Eric found Astrid sitting alone, looking up at the stars. He sat down beside her. Nervous? He asked. Terrified, she admitted. What if I freeze up? What if I can't say the words when I'm standing there in front of everyone? Do you remember what I told you the first night in the cave? That you needed to be brave a little longer? Astrid nodded. You've been brave for a year now. Brave when you were hurt and scared and had every reason to give up. Brave when you trained even though your body ached. Brave every single day since. Tomorrow is just one more day of being brave. And this time you won't be alone. Ragna will be there. I'll be there. 30 witnesses will be there. And somewhere in that crowd your mother will be there too, seeing that you're alive. Tears rolled down Astrid's cheeks, but she smiled. I can do this. I know you can. You're the bravest person I've ever met. The next morning they set out for the thing. Eric's entire group traveled together, a small army of justice seekers heading toward the assembly grounds. As they traveled, they picked up more supporters along the way. People who had heard the story. The morning of the thing dawned clear and bright, as if the gods themselves wanted everyone to see what was about to unfold. The assembly grounds filled early with jarls, chieftains, law speakers, free men, and curious onlookers from across the region. This was always a significant event where laws were made, disputes were settled, and justice was administered, but nobody knew just how significant this particular gathering would become. The formal proceedings began with the traditional ceremonies. Oaths were sworn, the gods were invoked, and the law speaker declared the assembly open for business. Various cases were heard first, minor disputes over land boundaries and trade disagreements. Bjorn sat among the jarls, looking bored and superior, occasionally making dismissive comments that drew nervous laughter from those around him. Eric watched from the crowd, his heart beating steadily. Everything was in place. All the witnesses were ready. Astrid waited in a tent with Ragna out of sight. The 3 supporting jarls knew their cues. Now it was just a matter of timing. When there was a break in the proceedings, Jarl Håkon stood up. His voice carried clearly across the assembly grounds. I wish to bring a serious matter before this thing, a matter of murder, theft, and the abuse of power. I formally accuse Jarl Bjorn of crimes that demand the assembly's judgment. The crowd went silent. This was unexpected. Accusing another jarl was serious business, not something done lightly. All eyes turned to Bjorn, who looked more annoyed than concerned. What nonsense is this? Bjorn said, his voice dripping with contempt. Håkon, are you so desperate for attention that you make up lies about your betters? But Håkon didn't back down. I make no lies. I have witnesses prepared to testify. I have evidence of multiple crimes. And I invoke the ancient right of any free man to seek justice before this assembly, regardless of who stands accused. The law speaker looked troubled but had no choice. The law was clear. The accusation has been properly made. Jarl Bjorn, you have the right to answer these charges. What say you? Bjorn stood, and his physical presence was intimidating. He was a large man, wealthy and powerful, and he knew it. I say this is a waste of the assembly's time. These accusations are the jealous lies of a rival who envies my success. I have done nothing that any jarl wouldn't do in managing his lands and people. Then you won't object to hearing the testimony of witnesses? Håkon pressed. Bring forward your so-called witnesses, Bjorn said with a dismissive wave. Let's get this foolishness over with. Eric stood up first. He walked into the assembly circle, that open space where speakers addressed the gathering. My name is Eric. I am a free man and a warrior. I stand to testify about what I witnessed 1 year ago. He told the story carefully and clearly, how he had been traveling through Bjorn's territory and happened to see what occurred at the cliff. He described watching Bjorn throw a small child off the cliff to her apparent death, all because the child's mother had missed a tax payment due to illness. The crowd murmured with shock. Bjorn's face reddened with anger. This man is a liar. He's some wandering troublemaker trying to defame me for his own purposes. I am not finished, Eric said calmly. If I am lying, then explain this. Bring forward the next witness. Sten stepped into the circle, and Bjorn's expression changed to one of disbelief. Sten had been one of his own warriors, had stood right there when it happened. The betrayal hit Bjorn like a physical blow. I was there, Sten said, his voice steady despite the shame he felt. I was one of the warriors who accompanied Jarl Bjorn that day. I watched him seize an 8-year-old girl from her sick mother. I watched him drag that child to the cliff, and I watched him throw her over the edge while she screamed and her mother begged for mercy. I stood there and did nothing, and that cowardice has haunted me every day since. But I will not stay silent anymore. The crowd's murmuring grew louder. A Jarl's own warrior testifying against him was almost unheard of. Bjorn's face had gone from red to pale. He stood frozen, clearly not having expected this. Other witnesses came forward then. People who had suffered under Bjorn's rule. A farmer whose son had disappeared after questioning attacks. A merchant whose goods had been seized unfairly. One of the rival Jarl's widows, telling how Bjorn had orchestrated her husband's death. Each testimony built upon the last, creating a picture of systematic cruelty and abuse of power. Bjorn tried to interrupt, tried to dismiss each witness, but the law speaker insisted that all testimony be heard according to tradition. With each new witness, Bjorn's position grew weaker. Even his own warriors were starting to look uncomfortable, exchanging uncertain glances. But Bjorn still had his pride and his arrogance. When the witnesses finished, he stood again. "Very well, you've brought me criminals and malcontents to tell their lies. But where is your proof? Where is this child that supposedly died? Oh yes, she's dead, which means there's no actual victim to bring forward. Just stories from people who hate me because I rule with strength." This was the moment they had been waiting for. Eric caught Haakon's eye and nodded slightly. "Actually," Haakon said, standing again, "we do have the victim. The child who supposedly died when thrown from that cliff. She lives. And she is here." The entire assembly erupted in shocked conversation. Even Bjorn looked confused, uncertain for the first time. Dead children didn't come back. What trick was this? "That's impossible," Bjorn said, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. "No one survives those waters. No child could." He stopped talking as a small figure emerged from the crowd, walking steadily toward the assembly circle. Astrid was dressed simply but proudly, her head held high. Her left arm still showed slight signs of having been broken, healed but not quite the same as the other. And on her face was an expression of determination that made her seem much older than her 9 years. The crowd's noise died, down to complete silence as everyone stared at this girl who walked, like she was approaching a battle. Ragna walked beside her, one hand resting supportively on the child's shoulder, but Astrid needed no help. She walked with purpose. When Astrid reached the assembly circle and turned to face Bjorn, the Jarl's face went through a series of expressions. Shock, disbelief, recognition, and finally, fear. He knew this child. He remembered her. And seeing her standing there alive when she should have been dead over a year ago, shook something loose in his carefully constructed confidence. That's impossible," he stammered. "You're dead. You fell, I saw you fall." "I did fall," Astrid said, her young voice clear and strong in the silence. "You threw me off that cliff, Jarl Bjorn. You threw me because my mother was too sick to pay your taxes on time. You threw me while she begged for mercy. You threw me while your warriors held her back and the whole village watched, and you left me to die in those waters." Every eye in the assembly was locked on this small girl facing down a powerful Jarl. The contrast was stark. Bjorn large and imposing, surrounded by wealth and warriors. Astrid small and young, with nothing but her truth. "But I didn't die," Astrid continued. "Eric saved me. He pulled me from the water when I should have drowned. He kept me alive when my injuries should have killed me. And for a year, I've been healing, growing stronger, and waiting for this moment. Waiting to stand before you and everyone here and tell them exactly what you did." Bjorn tried to recover his composure. "This is some trick. Some girl you've trained to lie. How do I know this is even the same child?" From the crowd, a woman's cry rang out. "Astrid!" Helga pushed through the people running toward the assembly circle. When she saw her daughter, really saw her standing there alive and whole, she let out a sob of pure joy. Astrid broke from the circle and ran to her mother. They crashed together, holding each other tight, both crying. The entire assembly watched this reunion, and more than a few people wiped tears from their own eyes. There was something powerful about seeing a mother and daughter who had been torn apart reunited. Something that made Bjorn's crime feel even more real and immediate to everyone present. Helga held Astrid's face in her hands, looking at her as if she couldn't quite believe she was real. "My baby, my sweet girl, I thought you were gone. I thought I'd lost you forever. I'm here, Mother. I'm alive, and he's going to pay for what he did." Mother and daughter turned back to face Bjorn together. Helga spoke then, her voice shaking but clear. "I am this child's mother. I was there that day. I begged him to spare her. I offered him everything we had. He took my daughter anyway and threw her off that cliff while I screamed. This man is a monster who murdered my child, or so I thought. Thank the gods she somehow survived. The evidence was overwhelming now. Multiple witnesses, including Bjorn's own warrior. The victim herself alive and testifying. The victim's mother confirming every detail. Thorvald stood and began citing the specific laws that had been broken, the precedents for punishing such crimes. Bjorn looked around desperately at the other Jarls, seeking support. But one by one they avoided his eyes. Nobody wanted to be associated with a man who would murder a child. The other two Jarls who had agreed to support the accusation stood and added their voices to Hakon's. "I have grandchildren," one of them said. "If someone did to them what you did to this girl, I would tear the world apart to see justice done. You have shamed not just yourself but all Jarls by your actions." The Thing Assembly had spoken, but Eric knew this wasn't over. As the crowd dispersed after the verdict, he watched Bjorn carefully. The former Jarl stood in a kind of shocked silence, surrounded by warriors who no longer seemed sure if they should follow his orders. Some had already slipped away, unwilling to be associated with an outlaw. That night, Eric called a meeting with his core group. Astrid was there too, at her own insistence. She had started this journey and wanted to see it through to the end. "The assembly has done its part," Eric said. "Bjorn is outlawed, stripped of everything. But he's still alive, still dangerous, and still arrogant enough to think he can somehow recover from this. So what do we do?" Gunnar asked. "Hunt him down?" "No," Eric said thoughtfully. "We give him a choice." He laid out his plan. They would give Bjorn exactly what he had given others. A chance to survive through his own strength and cunning. They would let him run, give him a head start, and then track him. Let him feel the fear that his victims had felt. Let him understand what it meant to be helpless and hunted. "It's not about killing him," Eric explained. "It's about teaching him something he's never learned. What it feels like to be powerless. What it feels like to be the victim instead of the victimizer." Astrid spoke up, her voice quiet but firm. "I want to be there. When you find him, I need to see his face." Ragna started to object, but Eric held up a hand. "She's earned that right. But Astrid, understand this. What we're about to do isn't easy. It's not going to make the nightmares go away. It might even make them worse." "I know," Astrid said. "But I need to do this. I need to face him one more time. Not as a helpless victim, but as someone who survived everything he tried to do to me." The next morning, Eric and a small group approached what remained of Bjorn's camp. Most of his warriors had abandoned him overnight, unwilling to follow an outlaw with no resources to pay them. Only a handful remained, mostly out of stubborn loyalty or uncertainty about what else to do. Eric walked right up to Bjorn, who sat by a dying fire looking like a man who had aged 10 years overnight. The mighty Jarl was gone, replaced by someone who suddenly looked small and defeated. "You have a choice," Eric told him. "You can stay here and wait for someone to collect the bounty that will inevitably be placed on your head. Or you can take this." He tossed a single knife at Bjorn's feet. It was a decent weapon, the kind any warrior would want to have. But it was also just one knife against the wilderness. "You get 3 hours head start," Eric continued. "Then we come after you. If you can evade us, escape these lands, and never come back, you live. If we catch you, well, we'll see what happens then. The same chance you gave that little girl. Survive if you can." Bjorn's eyes burned with hatred, but there was fear there too. Perhaps for the first time in his life, he understood what it meant to be truly afraid. He grabbed the knife and stood up, his pride still making him want to spit defiance, but his survival instinct was stronger. "This isn't over," he growled. "For you it is," Eric said calmly. "Your 3 hours start now." Bjorn ran. He headed toward the forest, moving fast despite his size. His few remaining warriors looked uncertain, but Eric addressed them directly. "You're free to go. Your master is an outlaw. You owe him nothing. Walk away now, and there's no grudge against you." One by one they left. Only Bjorn remained, disappearing into the trees like a hunted animal. Eric waited exactly 3 hours, marked by the movement of the sun. Then he, Gunnar, Ragna, and Astrid set out after him. Tracking Bjorn wasn't difficult. The former Jarl was used to having others do such work for him. He left obvious signs, broken branches, disturbed ground, even footprints in soft earth. Eric almost felt sorry for him. Almost. They moved through the forest steadily, following the trail. Astrid kept pace with the adults, her training with Ragna having made her stronger and more capable than most children her age. She said little, focused on the path ahead. By nightfall, they could tell Bjorn was tiring. His trail showed signs of stumbling, of resting more frequently. He was heading toward the coast, perhaps hoping to find a boat or a place to hide. Eric allowed himself a grim smile. The coast meant cliffs. How appropriate. They caught up to him on the second day. Bjorn had made camp in a small cave, trying to rest. He looked terrible, his fine clothes torn and dirty, his face scratched from branches, his eyes wild with exhaustion and fear. When he saw them approaching, he grabbed his knife and backed deeper into the cave. "Stay back," he shouted, but his voice cracked. "I'll fight. I'll kill all of you." "You'll try," Gunnar said, his massive frame blocking the cave entrance. But Eric gestured for him to step aside. "We're not here to kill you, Bjorn. Not yet, anyway. We're here to talk." "Talk?" Bjorn laughed bitterly. "What is there to talk about? You've destroyed me. Taken everything." "You destroyed yourself," Eric said calmly. "Every crime you committed, every person you hurt, every life you ruined. That's what destroyed you. We just made sure everyone knew about it." Bjorn's eyes found Astrid, standing between Eric and Ragna. Something flickered across his face. Maybe recognition of just how badly he had underestimated this child and the people who protected her. "You!" he spat. "You should be dead. You should have died in those waters, Mang." "But I didn't," Astrid said, stepping forward. Her voice was steady, though Eric could see her hands trembling slightly. "I survived because someone cared enough to save me. Because someone thought my life mattered. You threw me away like I was nothing, but I'm not nothing. I'm stronger than you ever were." "Stronger?" Bjorn laughed harshly. "You're a child." "I'm a child who survived being murdered by you. I'm a child who stood before the Thing Assembly and helped bring you down. I'm a child who will grow up and become someone who protects others from people like you. Yes, I'm stronger than you. Because strength isn't about being cruel or powerful. It's about surviving, enduring, and fighting for what's right." The words hit Bjorn harder than any physical blow could have. He slumped against the cave wall, and for the first time he seemed to really understand what he had lost. Not just his power and wealth, but any claim to honor or respect he might have had. "What do you want from me?" he asked quietly. Eric looked at Astrid. This was her moment. She had earned the right to decide what happened next. Astrid was quiet for a long moment, studying the man who had tried to kill her. A year ago he had been this terrifying, powerful figure who held life and death in his hands. Now he looked pathetic, small, defeated. She had imagined this moment countless times during her recovery. During her training, she had thought she would want revenge, would want him to suffer the way she had suffered. But standing here now, looking at this broken man, she realized something. Killing him wouldn't take away her nightmares. Hurting him wouldn't undo what he had done. He had already lost everything that mattered to him. His power was gone. His reputation was destroyed. He would spend the rest of his life as a hunted outlaw, looking over his shoulder, trusted by no one. That was a fate worse than death for someone like him. "I want you to live," Astrid said finally, and everyone looked at her in surprise. "I want you to live a long life as an outlaw. I want you to wake up every day knowing that a child you tried to murder brought about your downfall. I want you to know that while I grow stronger and build a good life, you'll be running and hiding and living in fear. That's my revenge, knowing that I won and you lost." She stepped closer to him, close enough that Bjorn could have reached out with his knife if he dared. But he didn't move. He just stared at this 9-year-old girl who had somehow become more powerful than he could ever imagine. "But first," Astrid continued, "you're going to do something for me. You're going to confess out loud. Tell us exactly what you did and why. Not for the law. The law has already judged you. But for you, so you can hear yourself admit what kind of monster you really are." Bjorn's face twisted with emotion. Pride fought with fear. Arrogance battled with defeat. And finally the words came tumbling out. "I threw you off the cliff," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Your mother couldn't pay, and I wanted to make an example. I wanted everyone to fear me so much that they would never dare disobey. I didn't care that you were a child. I didn't care that you were innocent. I just wanted power, control, respect through fear." He looked up at Astrid, and there were actually tears in his eyes now. "I've done so many terrible things. Killed people who questioned me. Stolen from those who couldn't fight back. Hurt anyone who stood in my way. And for what? All that power, all that control, and I end up here, beaten by a child I should have shown mercy to." "You should have shown mercy to everyone," Eric said. "That was always your choice. You chose cruelty instead. They left Bjorn in that cave with his knife and his guilt. As they walked away, Gunnar asked the question everyone was thinking. What if he comes back? What if he tries to hurt someone else? He won't, Ragnar said confidently. Look at him. He's broken. The man who walked into that thing assembly doesn't exist anymore. What's left is just a shadow. Eric nodded. We'll spread word throughout the region. His face, his description, what he did. If he shows himself anywhere civilized, someone will recognize him. He'll spend the rest of his life in the wilderness alone, remembering how a little girl destroyed everything he built. 3 months had passed since the thing assembly, and spring had turned to summer. The region that had once lived under Bjorn's shadow was slowly learning to breathe freely again. A new Jarl had been appointed, a fair-minded man named Halldor who believed in justice rather than fear. The difference was like night and day. Astrid and her mother Helga had been given a new home, larger and more comfortable than their old one, along with land and resources as compensation for their suffering. It was located in a different village, away from the cliff and the painful memories associated with it, though Astrid knew she would carry those memories wherever she went. The reunion between mother and daughter had been beautiful to witness. For weeks, Helga barely let Astrid out of her sight, as if afraid that if she looked away, her daughter might disappear again. They talked for hours, Helga telling Astrid about the dark months when she thought she had lost her, Astrid sharing stories of her recovery and training. They cried together, laughed together, and slowly began to heal together. But Astrid had changed. The little girl who used to sit quietly beside her mother's loom was gone. In her place was someone stronger, more determined, someone who had seen the worst of the world and decided to fight against it. Helga could see it in the way her daughter moved, in the confidence in her eyes, in the way she practiced with her staff every morning without fail. She's grown up too fast, Helga said to Eric one evening. He had stayed in the area, wanting to make sure Astrid and her mother were truly safe before moving on with his wandering life. She had to, Eric replied gently. What happened to her would have broken most adults. But she's strong, your daughter. Stronger than anyone I've ever met. Will the nightmares ever stop? Helga asked, worry creasing her face. She heard Astrid cry out in her sleep sometimes, reliving that terrible fall. Probably not completely, Eric admitted, but they'll fade with time, and she has tools now to deal with them. Ragnar taught her well, as did I. She knows she's not helpless anymore. Ragnar had decided to stay in the region too, at least for a while. She had grown fond of Astrid and wanted to continue her training. The Shield Maiden had set up a practice area near Astrid's new home, and every day young people from the surrounding villages would come to learn from her. Boys and girls both, eager to learn how to protect themselves and others. Astrid was the star pupil, of course. At 9 years old, she could now handle a staff better than some grown warriors. Her small size, which might have seemed like a disadvantage, actually helped her. She was quick, agile, and had learned to use her opponent's strength against them, but more than physical skills, Ragnar was teaching her wisdom. Fighting should always be the last choice, Ragnar told her students. A true warrior's first weapon is their mind. Avoid conflict when you can. De-escalate when possible. But when you must fight, fight with everything you have and fight for what's right. Word of Astrid's story had spread throughout the region and beyond. People called her the girl who fell from the sky or the cliff survivor. Some even started calling her Astrid the Brave, though she always felt uncomfortable with such titles. She didn't think of herself as particularly brave. She had just done what she needed to do to survive, but others saw her differently. Victims of injustice began seeking her out, telling her their stories, asking for advice or help. At first, Astrid didn't know what to do with all this attention. She was still just a child after all. But Eric helped her understand that she had become something important, a symbol of hope for those who felt powerless. You showed people that even the smallest person can stand up to tyranny, Eric explained. You proved that victims don't have to stay victims. That's powerful, Astrid. People need that hope. So Astrid started listening to the stories people brought her. She couldn't solve all their problems, but she could listen, offer comfort, and when appropriate, bring attention to injustices that might otherwise be ignored. Eric helped her navigate the politics of it all, teaching her who to talk to, how to present cases, when to push and when to wait. One day, a mother arrived with her 2 young sons. Her husband had been killed by bandits and the local authorities were doing nothing about it, because the bandits had bribed them. The woman was desperate with nowhere else to turn. Astrid listened to her story carefully, then looked at Eric. "We need to help her." "We do," Eric agreed. "But how?" Together, they worked out a plan. They would go to the new Jarl, Haldor, and present the case. They would gather evidence of the corruption. They would bring attention to the problem until it couldn't be ignored. It took weeks of careful work, but eventually the bandits were caught, and the corrupt officials were removed from their positions. The grateful mother thanked Astrid with tears in her eyes. "You saved us. My boys will grow up with justice because of you." That moment changed something in Astrid. She realized that this was what she wanted to do with her life. Not just survive, not just be strong for herself, but use her strength to protect others. To be the person she wished had been there when she needed help. Eric watched this transformation with pride and a touch of sadness. He had saved Astrid's life, but she was quickly outgrowing his ability to guide her. She needed more than he could teach her now. She needed to find her own path. One evening, as summer was turning to autumn, Eric sat down with Astrid. "I need to talk to you about something important." Astrid looked up from the piece of wood she was carving, one of many crafts Ragna had taught her. "What is it?" "I'm a wanderer, Astrid. It's who I am and who I've always been. I've stayed here longer than I've stayed anywhere in years, and it's been good. But I'm starting to feel the pull of the road again. I need to keep moving." Astrid felt a pang in her chest. Eric had been her savior, her teacher, her friend. The thought of him leaving hurt, but she understood. Some people weren't meant to stay in one place. "When will you go?" she asked quietly. "Soon, but I want you to know something first. I'm prouder of you than I could ever put into words. When I pulled you from that water, I just wanted to save a child's life. I never imagined you would become this. Someone who changes the world around her, who gives hope to others, who stands for justice. You're remarkable, Astrid." Tears filled Astrid's eyes. "I wouldn't be any of this without you. You saved me. You taught me. You believed in me when I was just a scared little girl. You were never just anything." Eric said gently, "You've always been extraordinary. I just helped you see it." He pulled something from his pack, a beautifully crafted knife with a bone handle. "I want you to have this. I've carried it for 20 years through countless journeys. It saved my life more than once. Now I want it to protect yours." Astrid took the knife reverently. It was a warrior's weapon, given from a warrior to someone he considered worthy. "I'll treasure it always. Use it wisely. Use it to protect those who can't protect themselves. And remember, true strength is knowing when not to use it." Eric left a week later, early one morning as the mist was still rising from the ground. Astrid, Helga, Ragna, and many of the villagers came to see him off. He hugged each of them, saving Astrid for last. "Will I ever see you again?" she asked, holding back tears. "The world is smaller than you think," Eric said with a smile, "and I have a feeling you'll be traveling it yourself soon enough. Our paths will cross again, I'm certain of it. Until then, stay strong, stay brave, and stay true to yourself." He walked away down the forest path, his pack on his back, his walking staff in hand, looking every bit the wanderer he was. Astrid watched until he disappeared from sight, knowing that a chapter of her life was closing but a new one was beginning. The years that followed were full of growth and learning. Astrid trained with Ragna until she was 12, by which point she could best opponents twice her size. But she also studied with Thorvald, learning about law and justice, about how to navigate the complex world of things and assemblies. She learned to read and write, rare skills for anyone but especially for someone of her background. As she grew older, Astrid began traveling with Ragna, going from village to village, helping settle disputes, training young people in self-defense and standing up against injustice wherever they found it. Her reputation grew. Astrid the Brave became known throughout the northern lands as someone you could turn to when you had nowhere else to go. She never forgot what had happened to her. The nightmares became less frequent over time, but they never completely stopped. She still sometimes woke up feeling like she was falling, still sometimes heard her mother's screams in her dreams, but she had learned to live with it, to use those memories as fuel for her mission rather than letting them destroy her. By the time Astrid was 15, she had helped dozens of families find justice, trained hundreds of young people, and even advised Jarls on matters of law and fairness. She had become a shield maiden like Ragna, not just in title but in truth. She wore her sword and shield with pride, but she was always prouder when she could solve problems without violence. Her mother Helga watched all of this with a mixture of pride and worry. Her little girl had become a force for good in the world, but she had also become someone who would always put herself in danger to help others. That was both Helga's greatest joy and her deepest fear.